Even 9:35 is okay already. Forgot one thing. Imam Nihal. Okay, he's covering the street. Come from this side, not in front of the camera. You need darkness?
Yeah.
You need light bulb?
The one off.
One चाहिए?
Yeah, just one is fine.
No.
Can everyone see it from the back? Okay.
Okay, start.
Yeah, go. I'm ready. I've been ready.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone.
Assalamu rahmatullahi.
So, alhamdulillah, I'm happy to be back at ICCT after almost 4 years, almost 4 years this year. I also see a lot of people that I have not. I'm terrible at introductions, but for those of you that don't know me, I grew up in New Jersey, and I used to make fun of Connecticut a lot. And for that reason, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided that you're moving to Connecticut for 3 years. So I ended up staying here. I actually fell in love with Hartford. And I know many of you may not feel that way, right? You kind of feel like maybe you're just stuck here. But I actually had a wonderful time as I was driving up and down the 84. I have a lot of good memories here. I moved here to go to the Hartford Seminary where I completed my master's. And during that time period, I was the director of religious affairs here. There's a difference of opinion whether or not I was the Imam or the director of religious affairs. I think if, you're the guy that does everything. That's what ends up happening. I was here until 2021. Me and my wife were living near Capitol Avenue. And then I moved to Turkey for 3 years. And during that time period, the first year I was there, I studied at a ma'had with some Syrian ulama. As many of you know, there's a large diaspora of Syrian scholars that lived in Turkey who were the regime of Bashar al-Assad. And return now that the Assad regime is no longer in power. The second year I spent learning Turkish, so I completed a Turkish language certificate. And the third year was just a lot of travel, and those what I wanted to do with my life. So I decided to begin applying to PhD programs. So for everyone that keeps asking when I'm going back to Turkey, right now I'm not going back to Turkey. I now live in California, in Los Angeles, where I am completing my PhD in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures in Islamic Studies. And I'm particularly focusing on the Ottoman Empire. So Ottoman history is something that I was intrigued by during this time period in Turkey, which kind of led me to want to pursue it as an academic pursuit. My family is originally from India, and I have been intrigued by the Muslim world till, I honestly was not ready to come back to America. And now that Trump's back, it's I think a good time that I came back to America. Every time I come to ICCT, Trump is president. I don't know why. That's like weird, right? Like he had just been elected, came to Hartford, right? And then, this year it is what it is. Anyways, this isn't a lecture about Trump. So I ended up also starting a small institution called Maktab Academy. It's maktabacademy.net. The idea was simple. I wanted to teach Islamic studies to adults, and this allowed me to do that. So we have about 70 students that study with us from all over the world that study Quran, Islamic studies. We have a cover-to-cover tafsir of the Quran that we do. So if you're interested in my work, definitely just go to the website. And the least I'll ask you to do is just go to the website, scroll to the European colonization, the modern Muslim, you understand it in remnants. Young people that go into the United States are always concerned about identity. Am I American, or am I Muslim, or am I Indian, or am I Syrian, or am I Egyptian? Like, what am I? And the short answer I'll give it to you, you're all those things, and that's okay to be all those things. And the reason you're so confused is because you're not thinking, you're being force-fed this idea, this dichotomy that you cannot be both, but there's not much you can do. Your ethnicity is a part of who you are, your nationality is a part of who you are, and where you come from or the tribe you come from is also a part of who you are. This is what it is. So, European colonization shaping the modern Muslim world. Everyone has heard this word, colonization. Right? Does anyone know what colonization is? Can somebody raise their hand and tell me? Yes, all the way in the back. You have to raise your voice. When somebody comes to what? Invade the country. That's good. So there's invasion that's a part of it. Anyone else? What is colonization? Sisters? Yes?
Taking over another country's society, culture, educational institutions.
Okay, so taking over another country's society, their educational institutions, yes?
Resource extraction.
Good, resource extraction. When is the first time the average American child will learn about colonization?
Colonization of the United
And it's all about there once was a group of Native Americans welcome, chai people Turkey with us. That's not what colonization is. Colonization, if we have a little working definition from this book, it's understood as you're expanding your empire. Number one, imperial expansion. Number two, you are asserting yourself over other people. So why, for example, did the American Revolution happen? Because they were tired of British colonization. Number three, you want to establish a structure of governance that has to do nothing with the way local people work. And then number four, you're looking to displace the local population. And number five, you're looking to increase your ideological influence on those people. They didn't understand why colonization matters. And the question comes up, why colonize? What's the benefit? Why come over here? Why go into these different countries? Why did the British enter India? Why did the Dutch enter Indonesia? Why did the Spanish enter what is now considered Mexico? Well, there's reasons. Number one, economic motives. Exactly, resources. It's the same reason today we may not call it colonization. We We may call it abiding. We may call it having our financial interests vested. So number one are economic motives. Number two, global rivalry. People don't realize this, but many war-torn areas, you know why they're war-torn? Syria, for many years, from 2011 to 2024, was just a fighting ground between who? America, Russia, Iran, and other factions. So just like how in Syria that was happening, in India, for example, who was fighting who? The Dutch and the British. The Dutch and the British were constantly fighting with each other until guess what? The Dutch lost. The British and the French were fighting with each other, still lost. So why is it that, for example, in India, people speak English along with their local language because the British conquered, and they removed any remnants of any of the other languages? Number three, yes, spread Christianity. That was very much so a part of it. So European colonizers, whoever they are, we're going to talk about them. The idea was that the European powers are very much so connected to Christianity. Christianity is directly opposite of Islam, hence we need to spread Christianity, the weakness of the Muslim world. From the 1700s onward in the 1800s, the Muslim world was fracturing. The Muslim world consisted of, many different empires, but there were three major empires. Number one was the Ottoman Caliphate, which we'll take a look at. Number two was the Safavid Empire, and number three was the Mughal Empire. I'm going to kind of just share a few pictures of myself. So I actually came to ICCT. I spent 3 years traveling India. So this is, and Pakistan actually, I recently went to Pakistan as well. I lived in Lucknow, which is a picture in the top left. This is me in Jaipur in Rajasthan, down in Hyderabad, best food in the world. Calcutta, and over the summer I went to Lahore. So there was a part of me that was really interested in South Asia. Then after that, I made my way to Europe and North Africa. The top left picture is of Spain. Anybody here been to Spain? Spain is amazing, right? Spain is amazing. It's one of the most beautiful places I have ever been to. One of the things that brought me to Istanbul was after I visited it, it was just so beautiful. How many of you have been to Turkey? Probably many more hands. It's a beautiful place, right? So it's one of those things. But Spain was the only other place I've ever visited where I'm like, I really need to move here. And then at the bottom, that's Sevilla. For those of you, that's Cordoba. That was the Grand Mosque of Cordoba. We'll talk about Spain. Up there, who knows where this is in the top middle? Bosnia, where? Mostar, right? The famous bridge that the Croats blew up. It was an Ottoman bridge built in the 1600s, and the Croats blew it up. And then also at the bottom is the Srebrenica genocide, which happened in the 90s. And then this is where. Right, so this top picture is in Fez, and the bottom picture. Then I kept moving. I was also interested in that top left picture is actually, anybody know where that is? No, not Timbuktu. That's Ahmed al-Qulum Jami in Cairo. Sorry, Ghana. Right? And that's me and my wife walking, and a random photographer from Indonesia took that picture of us. It's a beautiful picture. And then, went to Egypt, and then after that, the middle two pictures, anybody know where that is? That's Uzbekistan, Samarkand, and Bukhara. And finally, on the right is Turkey. So at the bottom is the Hagia Sophia. At the top, this is an area called Kiblala, literally the mountain of the. And this picture is exactly as it is. That's how beautiful it was. So I got going, right? And some of these pictures are. Two on the left you've already seen. These two middle pictures are in northern Syria. You see that flag up there? Right, that's the new Syrian flag. But this was actually run by the Free Syrian Army. We visited after the earthquake in Turkey. We went to Syria for a day and we were handing out supplies. It was a very difficult scene to see. Because this area here is in Tel Abyad or Aqsa, one of those two cities. And this little boy at the bottom, he's sitting here, you can't see it. Sorry for the graphic content, he has a nail in his knee. And he was just sitting. This area was first controlled by Bashar al-Assad's army. Then after that, it was controlled by ISIS. Then after that, it was controlled by the American army. Then after that, it was controlled by the Kurds, and now it's controlled by Turkey, and now it's back to Syria. There's no emergency services here. And on people's houses, it was written that we are civilians, do not enter, do not harm us, because there will be indiscriminate shooting and killing. And these two pictures are basically there at the school. And then on the right is Iran, so this is Isfahan, and then this is Shiraz. Funny story, we were there in April of last year at this time, on the day that Iran fired missiles at Israel. It's a very interesting time to be in Tehran. But things were okay, and this is another side point. Americans worry like no tomorrow. Worried about control and whether a bunch of Turks, and they're like, what are you gonna do? Everyone in Iran is okay, but obviously when it's actually in that moment I realized that what media feeds you is lies. When you turn on your phone and you open up social media, is made to make you and me anxious, to make me and you sad, to make me and you feel terrible 24/7. That's how social media is made. Unfortunately, it's the reality of it, and I learned that in Iran at that time. And I'll tell you this, no one likes the government in Iran, and what a lot of people don't know about Iran is obviously they had a very terrible role in Syria for many, many years in working with Assad's army. But it's one of the most beautiful places you'll ever visit. And people forget, for example, that Iran for 800 years was a major Sunni place of scholarship. And it became Shi'i about in the 1500s. And people think that this is just about religious differences. It's less about religious differences and much more about, right? And it made a difference between the showcase that we are not the Ottoman Sunni Hanafi identity, which sought to push back against a Safavid Shi'i Persian identity, which we don't have a lot of time to talk about, but just to give you an idea. And then finally, I didn't just go to the Muslim world, I also went through parts of Europe. So up top is in Amsterdam. So Amsterdam is there, on the bottom is France, up top there is Poland, the bottom here is does anyone know actually where this is? That's not Egypt, buddy. Where? Italy, good. Well, where in Italy? Yes, Vatican City. What does this look like to you all? For those of you that have been to Turkey, what does this look like? The Hagia Sophia. We're going to talk about this. When the Hagia Sophia was conquered, the Byzantine Empire was finished. They needed a new basilica, hence they built the St. Peter's Basilica to be the biggest basilica to showcase the beauty of, I guess, the Roman Empire, and to also a way to mourn the sadness of the loss of the Hagia Sophia. Up here, does anyone know where that is on the right?
Auschwitz.
That's not New Haven, that's Germany, Auschwitz. New Haven.
How about that?
Jeez. Anyone from New Haven is really offended. And then this here is Greece. So I was just interested to understand, how do we see Europe and how does Europe see us as in the Muslim world versus the non-Muslim world? So I went on these trips and it brought me to realize something. There are several events in the Muslim world which really bring about how things are right now. I live in California. Can somebody tell me, what is the main language spoken in California? No. What's the main language spoken in California? What country is the United States? What country is California? The United States. What's the main language spoken in the United States? English? Okay, why? Why do we speak English?
Because of English colonizers.
Hold on, raise your hand. Why do we speak English? Yes. Because this was a British colony. What did they speak in a British colony? It was English. So now, California, many of you don't know this, and we'll see it in a map, used to be a part of the Mexican Empire, and the Mexican Empire fought off the Spanish Empire. So I want you all to think about this. If you come from South Asian descent, why do you speak English? Because of the fact that British came there. It's not a coincidence that you are coming from a former British colony into another former British colony. Language binds you. Why does language bind you? Because, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, That's what the language happened to be. Anyone? Raise your hand.
Muhammad.
Yeah, so you speak French, right? French. Because the French colonized, right? So it's really interesting. You need to think about this. We speak these languages because of colonization as a direct result. But before we talk about colonization, let's talk about the Muslim world. This here is a picture or an artist rendering of Fatih Sultan Mehmed entering Constantinople and basically taking it over. Why does that matter? I'll tell you why it matters. The Hagia Sophia in Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was basically unconquerable from the time of the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What year did the Messenger pass away? 632, right? So if I were to take 1453 minus 632, 821 years. For 821 years, the Byzantine Empire and Turkey were impenetrable. What year is it today? 2025 minus 1453. That means that only for the last 572 years has Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, been occupied by, or been basically now Muslims have taken over it. So I want you to think about this. So from the time of Rasulullah until 1453 is a longer time period when that whole place did not have a Muslim presence versus now there is. But what happened? In 1453, this event occurs. It's funny, I once posted a picture of this on Instagram, and the quote I put on this picture is when Muslims first arrived in Queens, New York. Right? Right? This is here entering the gates of Jackson Heights as they make their way to Kebab King. Right? So it was an artist rendering. And this here, on the right side, does anyone know where this is? On the right? This is the tomb of Fatih Sultan Mehmed, right? Who conquered Istanbul. And there's a hadith that is written on top of his tomb. Now, generally speaking, you know how sometimes the most authentic Islamic information obviously comes from WhatsApp forwards, right? Like it's more authentic than Bukhari for some people, right? Like, oh, I got a WhatsApp forward, it has to be right. But one of the things you never want to do is taking a hadith and historicizing them when no such event has occurred. But in this situation, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لَتُفْتَحُنَّ الْقِسْطَنْطِينِيَّةِ, that indeed Constantinople will be conquered. وَلَنِعْمَ الْأَمِيرُ وَلَنِعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ وَلَنِعْمَ الْأَمِيرُ أَمِيرُهَا وَلَنِعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ الْجَيْشُ. How wonderful and beautiful will its commander be, and how amazing will its army be. And we see that actualization happening because the Muslims for 872 years did not see the city get conquered. So now, you see, this is just a map. Is there something on this? Yes. So we'll talk about this in a moment. So now, we see that this entire region comes to be ruled under Muslims up until 1924. And even till now, even though there's no Ottoman Caliphate in there. Any Algerians here? You're not Algerian, you're Palestinian. You're Palestinian. All right, yeah, I see a Palestinian, I see a Moroccan. Anyone here from Beirut, from Lebanon? Any Lebanese here? Okay. Anyone here from Turkey? No Turks? Okay. But basically, I'm going to show you something. You know how all these different countries people think of as different cultures? Say, for example, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, right? The entire Arabian Peninsula, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, all these different names I'm saying. The Balkans, hey, who's from the Balkans? I mean, where are you at? Oh, there you are, yeah. Right? Bosnia, Albania, Montenegro, Croatia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, Greece, and Anatolia was all part of one empire. So you could literally drive from Budapest down to Mecca or Medina if you wanted, and no one could stop you. If you had a car. You hear these stories about the Hijaz Railway, right? Everyone knows about the Hijaz Railway. It's a train station that they started building in World War I that was supposed to go from Istanbul to Damascus, to Lebanon, to Mecca, and then Constantinople was impenetrable. So what they did is they by sea, they landed here in Greece and made their way upwards and took over all this land, and then began to close in. Eventually, Constantinople is at the center of that area. Once Constantinople is taken over, a major superpower is no longer in existence. Let me ask you all something. How many of you remember the dissolving of the USSR? How many of you remember that? Was that a small incident? What did it do? It reshaped the dynamics of the world, the economics of the world, the politics of the world, the way religion would be interacted with. After the USSR was dissolved, one of the things that started happening, or right before that started happening, was the USSR encroaching on Muslim lands, and we'll talk about that. Some of those Muslim lands include Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. So back in the 80s, many of you don't know this. You ever heard of this group called the Taliban? Right? Post-2001, it was the boogeyman. You don't say that word. But it called the Taliban. They literally fought the Russians. Many different roles. We see here, once Constantinople is conquered, the entire region changes, or over just 100 years, this whole section becomes absorbed into the Ottoman Empire. Does anyone know where this is in Turkey? This is the grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiallahu anhu. Does anyone know who Abu Ayyub al-Ansari is? Yes.
He heard the hadith of Constantinople being conquered, so out of that he migrated there and he died outside, died in that area, and then even the Christians acknowledged his sainthood. Yes, very good.
But who was he? The Prophet. Raise your hand. What was the famous incident? Yes. What's the famous story about Abu Ayyub al-Ansari? What's the significance?
So his camel sat in front of his house, I think.
Good, right? His camel, Rasulullah's camel, when he came to where? Medina. His camel, Rasulullah let his camel go, right? And the camel stopped at the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stayed there with him. And did the Messenger of Allah stay on the top floor or the bottom floor? Where did he stay? The
Bottom floor first.
bottom floor first, then top floor out of respect, right? But, good, so you know that story. It is authentically reported that when the hadith about conquering Constantinople was brought to Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, he said, I am going to go to Constantinople. And he went and he fought and he died right outside the walls of Istanbul. So if you actually go to Istanbul today, if you have this little block here, is considered Turkey, and the walls, considered Constantinople, the walls were like here. But modern Istanbul is like this big. There's no more wall. The walls are there. They don't really represent the border of Istanbul anymore. Abu Ayyub went and he passes away. Again, this is like 600 something, right? The Christians that were living at that time period, they had an idea of who this gentleman was. They just knew that he was someone respected. And they had an idea of who he basically represented to the Muslims. So what ended up happening is when Muhammad actually description to be in the clan. The Ottomans were not Qurayshi, but the closest Qurayshi was this companion of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Ottomans started their empire, they began to coronate their sultan. Whenever a new sultan would be appointed, the new sultan would be appointed near the proximity of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari's grave. Abu Ayyub served as a beacon of legitimacy for the Ottomans. Served as a beacon of legitimacy for the Ottomans up until today. So it was a very interesting point to keep in mind. And now the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia is one of the most beautiful places you will ever see in this world. And if you actually look at it, you can see the mihrab, you can see the minbar, and then you can see up here a picture from the Byzantine era of supposedly Mother Mary. And you still see many of the icons there. So now today, if you go there, they just covered it up. Right? They covered it like a cloth. but like a claw. But when this building was taken, the end of the Byzantine Empire had occurred. And this is what it looks like from the outside. Now, to bring into perspective, we read the Quran, but the Quran has a history associated to it. So when we're talking about these instances, I want you to think back to this. The Hagia Sophia started to be built, or it was completed being built, a little bit like 25 or 30 years before the birth of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you know how today when you talk about superpowers in the world, you have the United States, you have China. I mean, I don't know. Somebody was joking what's going to happen to this country in 10 years. I was like, oh, 10 years, that's a long time. You think that at this rate good for the next 10 years? But sure, America is a superpower, Russia is a superpower, China is a superpower. At that time, the time the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who were the two superpowers? The Persians, right? Which is the Sasanian Empire, and number two, the Romans, which was the Byzantine Empire. The head of the Byzantine Empire, where the head emperor used to be and direct the wars from, was the Hagia Sophia. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim, Ghulibatir Rum, Alif Lam Mim, Rome has been conquered. Allah is talking about these folks getting conquered. This is the historical reference to Rome at that time. So when you go to the Hagia Sophia, whenever you have a chance to go there, don't just be mesmerized by how beautiful it looks, but be mesmerized by the fact, though not directly referenced in the Quran, was the seat of the Roman Empire at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Mind-boggling. But guess what? As one Islamic empire rose, which empire are we talking about? The Ottoman Empire. Another came to an end. And that empire was Muslim Spain. So this here is a picture of where the Spanish Empire went. Now, remember how I was talking about colonization? What were some of the reasons for colonization? We said spreading, religion, economic exploitation, putting your population in those places for rule. So the Spanish, they moved towards the west, right? And keep this in mind, the Spanish and the Italians were very much so connected, right? The Spanish and the Italians were very much so connected to each other. Christopher Columbus, he wasn't Spanish, he was Italian, right? Their empires were very much so connected. And for those of you that speak Spanish, it has a lot of similarity with Italian. And Italian has a lot of similarity with Spanish. But look, you see how much of the United States was actually run by the Spanish? Like, it's actually insane. Think about this. And I know for me, I grew up going to New Jersey public schools. Like, they just teach you the Pilgrims came, they shook hands with the Native Americans, and then for some reason the French helped kick out the British, and for some reason half of America speaks Spanish. Nobody talks about the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire was like a force to be reckoned with. Look at this. They went all the way towards the lower part of Canada, down to Chile. There's a reason South America, they speak Spanish there, because the Spanish Empire went that way. So the Spanish Empire began to colonize the world in 1492. But how did this happen? What's the story of Spain? Oh, by the way, for those of you that know about Morocco, we mentioned that the colonial language spoken in Morocco is what? French, really. But there's even a section of it that was the Spanish quarter, because the Spanish arrived there, and if you actually know, there's a small. So the joke was 2 years ago during the World went head to head, and who won? Morocco. Did Morocco win? Yeah, Morocco won. But you guys are colonizing in the north of Spain. And then obviously the Philippines, which we'll talk about. But the Spanish Empire, before it became the Spanish Empire, was known as Al-Andalus. It was known as Umayyad Spain from 711 to 1492. It used to be a Muslim place. And the story goes like this. After Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, right, the four Khulafa had their rule. And then after the four Khulafa, the Umayyads were the first empire outside of the four Khalifas to rule the Muslim world. And as they're ruling the Muslim world, a new empire comes in known as the Abbasids. And they kick out the Umayyads. But there's this one guy, his name is Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. He leaves, he flees the seat of power, which was in Damascus at that time, makes his way through the deserts of North Africa, arrives in Spain, and he basically reestablishes the Umayyad Empire in Spain. Now, many of you don't know this, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but you see how far up into southern France the Al-Andalus went into? Eventually, that started becoming less and less. So this here, this map showcases the peak of Al-Andalus. This is between 700s and 800s. This map is near the 900s to 1000s, to the year 1000-ish. You see how slowly and surely this area is becoming smaller and smaller? So eventually, the last part of Muslim Spain that was left was this bottom portion, a part of it which was now Granada. And Granada was the last holdout of Muslim power in Spain. Now look, 1492, I want you to do numbers because you know why numbers help? When you're American, you know that America's barely like 250 years old. And I remember going to Rhode Island, there was like a synagogue there, I went there some years ago, and I'm like, wow, synagogue from like 1600s, but that's not that old. When you look at these numbers, this goes much like further from that. So 1492 minus 711. 781 years Spain was ruled by Muslims. Okay? So 781 years. 2025 minus 1492 has only been 533 years. Again, Spain was Muslim longer than it has been Christian in the modern world. Imagine that. And to bring the point home, for those of you that speak Spanish, how do you say rice? How do you say rice in Arabic? Right? Why are there so many loanwords? Did you know that the Spanish language used to be written in Arabic, like Farsi, like Urdu used to be written in? It was changed to Latin numerals, Latin letters, guess in which year? 1492. So the change of the language was directly done to disconnect any aspect of Christendom from the Muslim world at that time in Islam. So basically that's what ended up happening. Now this is a picture artist rendering of the fall of Granada in 1492. The story goes something like this. Some people think it's a folk tale, some people think it's factually true, but regardless, it's a great story, and at the end of the day, Granada fell. The story is that this man was, I think, Muhammad the 8th or Muhammad the 9th. Now, when you ask how the Muslim world fell apart, it's actually not too different from the way the Muslim world will fall apart in 2025. How Muslim communities fall apart in 2025, no matter the place that it is in. So, why is it that the Spanish Empire just kept getting smaller, the Andalus kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller? So the Muslim rulers would have little ta'ifas, and the ta'ifas were like little empires that they wanted to rule. And they would go up to the Christians and say that, hey, and again, Catholics, right, when we're talking about this, and I want you to keep in mind, we're not just talking about any old Christians or Catholics. When I'm saying Muslims and I'm saying Christians, I'm talking about people of rule, right, of empire. Right, so Muslim meant a citizenship, and Christian meant a citizenship. So that's what we're looking at, not just as religions. Right, but at this time, the Muslim rulers would go to the Catholic rulers, and they say, hey, I think my cousin is an idiot. I don't like him. Right? I don't like that guy. I don't like my cousin. Can you help me, and I'll pay you a tribute to get rid of my cousin, and I'll take his land, and I'll give you a piece. And many of the Catholics that were there said, yeah, man. I got you, right? Come on into the Democratic Party. We'll give you a space. Yeah, we'll give you a little piece to make you feel good. And they kept doing that until they arrived at the last ta'ifa, which was Granada. And guess what? This young man on the left, he was told by the Catholic monarchs that, hey, we want you to rebel against your father, and we'll give you a piece of the land in Granada. He went. His father was back against him. He shows up to the army, kills his father, and he basically hands over the keys of Granada to these monarchs on the right, who we will talk about in just a moment. But the monarchs say, hey, Muhammad, yeah, we're going to hold on to these keys, and we need you to convert, be killed, or leave. Yeah, we just have, we had a change in plans. Right, the memo, you didn't get the memo? We sent it. And what ends up happening is the keys are handed over to these individuals. So the artist rendering, this lady, is anyone know who this is supposed to be? Isabella. Who is this supposed to be? Ferdinand. And who's this supposed to be? It's a guy by the name of Christopher Colombo, in English known as Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus is historically recorded to have been present at the fall of the last Taifa, the last emirate, the last Muslim stronghold of Spain. And the traditions relate that Muhammad, the 8th or 9th, he left with 1,100 servants or something to Morocco, because you know the Muslims in Morocco that are there today are refugees from where? From Spain. That's just what it is. Even till today, to be Moroccan to try and get a visa to go to Spain is not easy if you have a Moroccan passport. Muhammad, but if you go to Granada today, this is who here has been to Spain? Spain is one of the most beautiful of the Nasrid Palace. The Nasrid Palace was known as Al-Hamra, which in Arabic is Al-Hamra, which means what? Red. Al-Hamra is in reference to the Red Palace. And behind it you have the Sierra Nevada mountains. You have this beautiful, beautifully rich area. This is another picture I took at sunset from within the summer house of Al-Hamra. This is some of the most beautiful calligraphy you'll ever see. This statement, وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, there is no victor save God, there is no one that is considered victorious save Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is plastered all over the palace. So much so that if you go to hotels in Granada today, they have it in the hotels, they have no clue what it means. You know, Atlantic City opened a nightclub called like the Granada nightclub or something, and it has وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ plastered all over the nightclub. They don't know, right? They just don't know what it means. They're like, this is cool calligraphy. But I'll show you something even cooler. This is a view from Granada looking into the city. It's a beautiful, hilly place. You can hear church bells everywhere, but think about it, when it was Muslim, how the adhan would have sounded. And those church bells are done without any microphone. They're just bells rung, and you hear them echo throughout the hills. And then this is another picture of the summer house. So some of these next pictures are crazy. This is from a hill overlooking all of the city of Granada that me and my wife hiked up to. So you can see this. This is the Alhambra Palace, and then a dip, and then the entire city of Alhambra. This palace has secret walkways that are closed off right now that allow the princes to walk through the city at nighttime without being identified and talking to the people about the situation of the city and how best they could help it. And then we get to this part. This picture, my mind was blown at this point. This, now can someone tell me, if I were to zoom in here, what does it say on the walls? What do you think it says? Well, what as you see in this room, it says وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ all throughout the walls. Now, for some reason, there has been a Catholic tradition of moving saints, moving them around from their graves, showcasing them for blessings and whatnot. This area here was the original burial spot of Isabella. So she was buried here, and I made my way to the actual tomb of Ferdinand and Isabella. The actual tomb of Ferdinand and Isabella, it's even worse, is built in where the Grand Cathedral of Granada is, which is built on where once upon a time the Grand Mosque of Granada used to be. For those of you that have been to Qurtuba, and Qurtuba, you have the masjid there, but the church is inside of it, so you still have remnants of the masjid. And if you try to sit down, so I remember in Cordoba, I got very tired, so I just sat down like this. That's all I did. Within 2 minutes, I'm only have to get up and can't sit down. Why do you think that's the case? Because there are Muslims that come in and they want to make a salah in remembrance of the masjid.
They're afraid.
Yeah, right. And not only that, there's a very famous picture. For those of you that are Indian or Pakistani, you speak Farsi. of Muhammad Iqbal, Allama Iqbal, actually sitting in Qurtuba praying Salah at the mihrab that is located within Qurtuba. It's a very famous picture. I don't have it here, but you can look it up. But basically, I go there, and I go downstairs, and I find the actual tomb of Isabella and Ferdinand. There were no pictures allowed, but I'm like, I'm doing this. Right? But this is what it looked like. And in that same tomb, not in this one, but like 2 meters away from it, was the tomb of Christopher Columbus. So weird. Christopher Columbus, and this is a fact. What I'm about to say is not made up. There is evidence to showcase it, historical records. Dead man and alive man. Because his body was moved so many times. You know why his body was moved? Does anyone know where he was actually buried the first time? Dominican Republic. Guess what? If you, my friend, are of Hispanic origin, do Hispanic countries generally like Christopher Columbus? Right? Because we know that. Why? Because of the fact they did not see him as a good person. So the moment these countries would get independence, they would move his body to another part of like the Caribbean. Until finally, he ended up traveling he spent so much time on the ocean that there were very few pieces of this man left. So finally, they transferred him over to a grave made of 4 statues representing the 4 aspects of the kingdom of Isabella and Ferdinand extending into Italy in this same complex. Next, if you now go to Granada, there's only one masjid there, and this is a picture of that masjid. I have a friend that happens to live in Granada. It's really interesting. His grandfather was born and raised in New Jersey, but emigrated to England, so he was born and raised in England. He married a Spanish Muslim woman, and they came to this masjid and helped found this masjid. So he's a white guy of British origin whose family grew up in New Jersey, but he has a British accent and he lives in Spain. But his family helped found this masjid, and now they have this mimbar up here, right, where they give the adhan from. They loudly give the adhan in the Moroccan style. How many of you have been to Morocco? What is interesting about the adhan of Morocco that is not like the adhan of, say, Mecca, Medina, or Cairo? It sounds like an emergency alert system. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! That's what you hear. And imagine being in the most central part of Granada and you hear this. If all the Muslims buy out all the property on White Rock, maybe we can do this. Right? Imagine like knowing what this place goes through. It just brings you to tears to see this. So I went in 2023, I believe. Right? And in 2023 when I went, it was just very emotional to see that, by the way, the Qibla, right? So the way the adhan used to be given, it wasn't on a microphone. What the muazzin would do is he would run to one quarter, say, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And unfortunately, you only find this in North Africa. Because guess what? How do you get your voice to go very far? That's what you have to do. So you see the same style. You see how he's turning around and he's giving the adhan? But the most beautiful thing is, imagine, you know that Muslims were kicked out of this place. And by the way, you know, Muslims weren't kicked out in 1492. Muslims were kicked out later in the 1500s. Who was kicked out first?
The Jews.
The Jews. Guess who? And where did the Jews end up? Morocco. Where else? Turkey. Where else? Egypt. Where else? Where else? India. Wait, I thought we're all anti-Semitic. Anyways, but you see the beautiful nature of this. You only see this in Spain, but imagine that, and you're looking at the Alhambra. But yeah, this is actually, so I have a podcast. I have about 23 episodes that I've made. Story in Soil Coffee in Hartford. So I actually did my first episode. I filmed it in Story in Soil. And they're basically, it's actually really crazy. Two of the world's highest rated coffee shops are in Hartford and Manchester. Right, Silk City Coffee, for those of you that are in Manchester, and Story and Soil. So this is episode 19 with Nabilayu Marulanda, who is, I believe he was of Colombian origin, but he lives in Turkey. I met him there, this was at our home in Turkey, and we recorded a wonderful, wonderful podcast episode about reclaiming our narrative, but we speak about Spain, and how Spain, imagine this, me and you are sitting here today, and the riches that contributed to building this land, that allow me and you to build our livelihood on, is from the loot of Muslim Spain. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, we're going to take a little bit of a turn. Now, next to the Spanish, was the Portuguese Empire. I'm not going to talk about this, but the Portuguese are the ones with actually whom colonization started with, right? Oh, I got the lead. But yeah, so the Portuguese, it started with them, and they sailed which way? By the way, with Christopher Columbus, when they say he discovered America, even though he landed in the West Indies, where was he trying to go? He was trying to go to India. So for that reason, today we call Indians Indians, because Christopher Columbus got lost, so we decided to name them something that they're not the natives of this land. Anyways, so the Portuguese sent this guy named Vasco da Gama, not in 1415, but they started going to other places. The biggest Portuguese-speaking nation in the world now, is Brazil. The Portuguese went to other places as well, but in the Muslim world, it was in Oman and in the western part of India. Vasco da Gama, for those of you that are of Indian, Pakistani origin, you've heard this name. And I remember once doing a part of this presentation at a certain masjid, and for those of you that come from the Indian subcontinent, you may have heard this narrative. I said that Vasco da Gama showed up to India, and even non-Muslim narratives record the hordes of people that he slaughtered. He said, no, brother. Vasco da Gama was just a businessman. Oh, thank you, brother, mashallah. Yes, Christopher Columbus was just a businessman, right? And now we see here what ends up happening. Look at these portrayals as well, right? These are Europeans making this. You see how it just shows the European person in like opulence and looking really nice. And then here, what do we see? We see that he's trying to speak to this Indian king and trying to showcase and give him gifts. What did Vasco da Gama actually do? Let's talk about the Mari Pilgrims Massacre and the travelogue of this one individual by the name of Tomé Lopez. Tomé Lopez was a person that was paid to navigate for Vasco da Gama. And they arrived in Goa. And some of the Muslims were either leaving or coming from Hajj on a boat. And the whole point of colonization is what? To take resources. So if you can't get it easily, you just snatch it. Right? You just snatch it. You declare that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and take their oil. That's what you do. That's what happens in the world. So this, what he ended up doing, I mean, I have this whole thing written. I'm not going to read the whole thing. He basically sees the ship approaching, stops it. Now, what do you think? You're living in the 1500s, and a person that's unidentified stops you. Pirates of the Caribbean people, what do you think that probably is? It's probably a pirate. And they paid off, and then they let you go. So Vasco da Gama does what? He tells them, don't take their money. Actually, he says, leave them all in the ship and set the ship on fire. Amongst these locals. So he sets the ship on fire. Now what happens? A lot of people die that are either going to or coming from Hajj. Inshallah, those people were all shaheed. Right? Because we know that the person that is drowned or the person that's set on fire, they are shaheed. This point that this Portuguese navigator employed by Vasco da Gama is showing is the following. He says, I will never forget the rest of my days. The pilgrim ship thoroughly plundered on Gama's orders. The passengers are locked in the hold and the ship burnt and sank by artillery. It takes several days to go down and the Portuguese soldiers rode around the waters on longboats, mercilessly spearing the survivors. That was the entry of the Portuguese into South Asia. So you know how sometimes you see pictures like this? I did an AI rendering of what colonizers actually look like. I think that's a better portrayal. Anyways, we'll move into the British Empire. We don't have that much time. I actually want to give you all Q&A. Another reason why the majority of us here speak, how many of you are from the Arab world somewhere? Raise your hand. Are you somewhere from the Arab world? How many of you are from South Asia somewhere? Good, right? That's the majority of us. Why? This is why. The British had Canada, and they had the eastern part of the United States in this time period, 1608. And then they had everything, as you can tell, from Egypt down to South Africa. There's actually a picture I didn't include here. Has anyone ever heard of the Rhodes Scholarship?
Yeah.
Right? The Rhodes Scholarship is named after who? Cecil Rhodes. And everyone that goes on the Rhodes Scholarship, they spend a year studying at Oxford, and it's like the way into academia or any form of business entity. There's a very famous picture, which I don't have here right now for time's sake, showing Cecil Rhodes. Imagine this is Egypt, and this is South Africa. He's standing with 2 feet like this on Egypt and South Africa, saying, I'm going to build the British Railway from this way. Imagine a white man standing on Africa like that, saying that this is the peak of civilization. By the way, he also had a country named what? Rhodesia, which is now called what? Zimbabwe. Right? So you see all of this. There's an author whose name I'll share with you all later. His name is Shashi Tharoor. He's a politician from India. But he has a book, and in that, or during that book, he says something very interesting. He says, you ever heard the phrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire, right? Because of how vast it was. So there was not a part where the sun would set, except that the British Empire was illuminated. Shashi Tharoor said, yeah, the sun on the British Empire because God doesn't trust them in the dark. Very interesting. Here, another point. Winston praised former Prime Minister of England, everyone in the West sees him as like a savior of civilization, is reported to actually have reported close to the same number of people in India out of starvation as Hitler killed the Jews. Right? It's reported roughly in the Holocaust that roughly 6 million people were killed between the Jews, between the Gypsies, between Russians, Soviets. Winston Churchill decided that a famine was occurring in the world, so let's siphon out the food from Bengal and let the Bengalis die there. And by the way, when you're saying Bengali, my family's from Bihar. There was no such thing as Bihar back in the day. Bengal was that whole region that is considered Bangladesh, that is considered Kolkata, that is considered Bihar, Odisha. All those areas are considered Bengal. And he said, they're savages, let them die anyway. Right? So the history that we are reading is pointing to a narrative that's not correct. But there is something wonderful that happened, as difficult as it is. When English Quran translations used to be written in the past, they were written for the sake of what? To understand the other. So Europeans would read the Quran, they translate into French and Latin and all that. So between the year 1100 until the 1900s, for about 800, for almost 1,000 years actually, there were only a handful of Quran translations done in English, very small in number. But in India, within 100 years, they produced more Quran translations in English, and these individuals here, they understood that there is a reason for us to translate the Quran to really help have the world understand what the message of the Quran was for different reasons. And all of these translations happened in India, actually. By the way, just to make a point, so Muhammad Ali was actually a Qadiani. Right? But even then, his Quran translation was the first English Quran translation that came out of India. So there was, in less than 40 years, they produced more translations of the Quran than Europe did in a century. In a millennium. Now, this is the second to last story I'm going to talk to you all about. Okay, the second to last story, we'll have Q&A, and then after that, I'll tell the two stories and we'll talk about it. Has anyone ever heard of this story, the fall of Medina? So, The fall of Medina occurred between these two people. And if you were like me, once upon a time, I would look at these two people, and I would say that the guy in the turban and the beard is the good guy, and the guy without a beard looking like a Western soldier is actually the bad guy. But it's not the case. And it's a very crazy story. So, once upon a time, the Ottoman Empire, you guys remember that empire I was talking about. We said Makkah, Medina, Beirut, Baghdad, Philistine, Jerusalem, Istanbul, and Damascus were all part of one nation. They were part of one empire. So this gentleman over here on the left, he is told by the British that, hey Sharif, isn't it weird that you guys are the Arabs? The Sharif of Makkah. He was the governor of Makkah, basically, employed by the Ottomans. He's told by the British, Sharif, you guys are Arabs. You're from the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Shouldn't you rule Makkah and Medina? Why are the Ottomans ruling them? They're not Arabs. How dare they? And Sharif Hussein says, yeah, man. Cool story, bro. Let's do it. So you know what he does? The British say, hey, listen, if you help us get rid of the Ottomans, we will give you this land. Now, the second individual at hand, we haven't spoken about him. But basically, this is what the Ottoman Empire was. This is what Sharif Hussein was promised. Sharif Hussein was supposed to be the new Khalifa. Khalifatul Islam tahta Dawlat Britannia. He was supposed to be the new Khalifa of Islam. The new Arab Caliphate was to rise looking like this. All of Palestine, all of Jordan, all of Iraq, all of Saudi Arabia, Oman, all the countries that you know about were supposed to be in this synopsis. This is what he was promised. He was actually even promised a part of Lower Turkey initially, but the agreement did not come to be. So he was promised all of this is the new Arabian Caliphate. But guess what happened? The British decided to renege. Does anyone know who one of the individuals was that was brokering this deal on behalf of the British? A guy by the name of Lawrence. Right? Lawrence of Arabia. This is the man that entered and understood their language and convinced Sharif Hussein to make this deal. And the reason that by the way, Sharif Hussein, obviously, he attacked the Ottomans, he helped get them out, and we'll talk about the story in a moment. But Sharif Hussein ended up not getting this, and instead, he only got this little part up here, right? Like over here, it's not even properly denoted, right? It's like this part here. That area today is called Jordan. And we'll talk about why. So he gets this. Instead, the British say, hey, listen, us and the French, we made a deal. This deal is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, in which we are deciding that you are not going to get Palestine, just a little, part of land. We're not going to give it to you. You can have the other parts. We're just going to give you this part. Sharif Hussein, even though he's a complete traitor to the Ummah, had enough ghayra or haiba, enough shame to say that I will not accept this agreement if Palestine is not included under Muslim rule. So what they decide to do is like, look, you're no one, we don't care what you think. If you don't sign this, we're going to have another group of people attack you and basically take over. So Lawrence of Arabia and the Brits, they reach out to their friends in the eastern part of Arabia in Najd. And they say, hey, can we speak to the Al Saud family? Yeah, the Saudis. Yes, hi. We have this guy that's giving us trouble. If you guys want to take Makkah and Medina, it's all yours. We won't interfere. And up until that point, the British had held off the Najdis. So today, what ended up happening, before I talk about today, is the Najdis, the Al Saud family, ran Sharif Hussein out into the north, into what is considered modern-day Jordan. For those of you that have lived in Jordan, you know there's not much there, minus Amman, and minus a few tourist locations. It's not prime real estate. You know that. But eventually they run him out from there. But before we talk about running him out from there, who's this guy? This is Fakhruddin Pasha, who was also known as Fakhruddin Pasha. Fakhruddin Pasha was the Governor General of Medina, employed by the Ottomans to fight off Sharif Hussein. Now, we tend to think that a guy that looks like this, I don't know, can't trust him, blah, blah, blah. unfortunately, as Muslims, we dumb down someone's religiosity just the way they look, and that's not correct to do. But Fakhruddin Pasha, he's basically told in his dream, somebody comes to him. Actually, before I tell you that, he is commanded from Istanbul to hand over the keys of Medina to the British. Now, British and Sharif Hussein is the same thing. They're fighting together. And he has a dream. And in the dream, you know, like we always mention this, we don't take ahkam from dreams. Like you get a dream and like Allah has told me to only pray a 1 rak'ah fajr. Like, we don't do things like that. But when you have inspirations from dreams, it's a positive thing to look forward to. And in this dream, he says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to me. And in that dream, he said, Ya Fakhruddin, whether you die or whether or not you live should be of no concern to you, but do not hand over Medina to the British. And what ends up happening is Fakhruddin Pasha gets an order from Istanbul to stop fighting, and he decides not to. He decides to continue fighting the British until he is arrested by his own soldiers and sent off to a British prison in Malta. Now, his story is very interesting because even though he is jailed and after the Ottoman Empire is abolished, the Brits, the Greeks, the Italians, and I think, I'm forgetting who the fourth group was, the Ottoman Empire for 40 years was under European occupation. And a general by the name of Mustafa Kemal, who later went on to be known as Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, releases Fakhruddin Pasha from jail and fights together to remove the occupation of the European powers in the Ottoman Caliphate. When that happens, you will record that Turkey is the only Muslim country to have not been fully occupied by the Europeans. Hence, when you go to Turkey, can you easily get around with English? No. And people think like, oh man, they don't speak English. It's like, dude, you should be more concerned why you speak English. Because your people were colonized. Right? Now your kids grow up saying, Mommy, I don't want to be Indian, I want to be American. I want to be McDonald's. Right? And now, as kids get older, they want to know more about their historical past. But anyways, it's because they were not colonized. And today I can't talk about Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and what happened in Turkey later and how Islam was basically, for all intents and purposes, banned, but you get an idea of this. But Sharif Hussein, let's come back to him. You know how I was saying history is connected? So Sharif Hussein has a son named Abdullah. And Abdullah has a son named Talal. Talal has a son named Hussein. And Hussein has a son named Abdullah. This is the current king of Jordan. And by the way, he's not fully Jordanian, you all know that? He's half British. Right? But anyways, that's how our history is intertwined. That's how history comes to be. Now, we're not going to talk about all the other empires, but I'm just showcasing to you. You know how I've been talking about the different Muslim empires? All the highlighted parts are Muslim, okay? The yellow highlights are Muslim areas that each of these empires basically colonized. So India was not fully colonized by the French. Actually, the British and the Dutch basically kicked them out. So they had plans to colonize it, it didn't work. And when the French were kicked out of India, you know what they did? They came to America. Yeah, they came to America because they couldn't fight the British in India, they were too strong. So instead, they went to America, helped the colonists fight off the British there and win. And that's how they supplanted their rule in Canada and America. It's really interesting. So everyone wanted India at that time. Right? Even Christopher Columbus wanted, everyone wanted India. Be proud to be Indian. Be proud to be Hindustani, and India is later. Right? So you see the French come out. I had a chance to go to France. This is the tomb of Napoleon. Right? You all know Napoleon. He came into Egypt, and he was the first European to kind of make contact with Egypt. And this is another general. This is really interesting. In a church where these people are buried. They loved Morocco so much, and he wrote here that I can't read the whole thing, but basically the more I know Moroccans and the more I live in this country, the more I'm convinced by the greatness of this nation. Hubert Lauti. He was one of those generals that lived in Morocco at that time. But to give you also this idea, all of West Africa, all of North Africa, and all the way down to like this region, they still speak French today because of that. And in India, the one area where they still speak French today is Pondicherry in the south. Algeria. Algeria was ruled under the French up until 1960. Right, that's another point to keep in mind. And there was a direct connection to Algeria. Does anyone know the connection between Algerian independence and the United States? The Black Panthers? Right? There was all this conversation about what basically resistance looks like to colonial rule. So there was a lot of inter-conversations happening between America and the Algerians at that time. The Russian Empire, many of you may not know this, same thing. All these black lines, I made these borders. Up until today, these are majorly Muslim areas in Russia. Right? These are majorly Muslim areas in Russia today. And then the bottom part here, obviously, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, they all speak Russian, but they also speak their local languages of Uzbek and Kazakh and whatnot. But the rest of these, like for example, Astrakhan, Crimea, Kazan, Sibir, these are just absorbed into modern day Russia. So that's why also that down here, Dagestan and Chechnya, you all heard of those two countries, right? We hear about the struggle of Muslims in Dagestan and Chechnya. They've actually been struggling against the Russians for the last 300 years. It's a really good book. It's basically called Empire of Refugees, about the Dagestanis and the Chechens. By the way, Da in Turkish means mountain. So Dagestan is the country of mountains, like Pakistan, Afghanistan. It's very interesting. And again, this is just another point to showcase. This is the Timurid Empire. The Timurid Empire, once upon a time, imagine this. From Delhi to Samarkand, Tashkent, all of Iran, Afghanistan, Isfahan, Iraq, Mosul, Tabriz, and Sivas, Turkey, were all one empire. So when people ask, particularly if you're South Asian, like, oh, we come from this background, we come from that background, and everyone's like, yes, I am Ashraf, I am Sayyid, or whatever. Listen, just relax. You were just moving around like somebody goes from California to Texas for a job. That's all you were doing, right? And it wasn't that big of a deal. By the way, I haven't spoken about this, but if you're Gujarati, be proud, right? Because not during this time, but about 100 years later, Surat was like an international place of commerce. People loved coming to Surat from all over the world. This is me in Uzbekistan. So this is as beautiful as it looks. This sunset, that bird flying. This is the Media Arab Madrasa. It was the only madrasa that was allowed to stay open during the USSR's occupation of Uzbekistan. Why? We don't know. But think about this. The USSR, they didn't want religion. They didn't want the public display of religion. But they allowed this madrasa to stay open. And then this is in Bukhara. Both of these pictures in Bukhara. This is a ginormous minaret. This picture does not even showcase to you how giant this minaret is. When Genghis Khan arrived in Uzbekistan, he saw this and he was like, I don't like this, break it down. Because they wanted to destroy anything that represented a culture that was not their own. But his generals convinced him to leave it up and use it as a post for lookout. And now it's been standing here for 900 years. Very cool point. I'll skip that. Picture of the Dutch Empire, again. The Dutch were all over the place. Now, where me and you are sitting right now was an extension of the Dutch Empire, believe it or not. The Dutch arrived, and they arrived, one of the cities that they had was known as New Amsterdam, which is now known as what? New York. And they traded it because the British and the Dutch just kept fighting back and forth, and they're like, let's have a parlay, let's make a treaty. So the British had a little territory down here next to what is known as Guyana today. It's called Suriname. And they told the British, let's make a trade. We'll give you New Amsterdam and you can take Suriname. Terrible trade. Because there's not much in Suriname today. It's just like trees. But you see the Dutch here. But anyone here from Indonesia, Malaysia? Right? So for those of you that don't know, Indonesia, as you can all see here, was completely colonized by the Dutch. India, partly as well, but eventually the British kicked them out. The Italians, look at this. The Italians had all of Libya and they had all of Any Libyans or Somalis here? Any Somalis? No Somalis? Oh, alhamdulillah. Did your parents speak Italian?
Yes.
It's not about,
Yeah, they did, right? But it's not anymore.
no.
Yeah. So just like that in Russia, like if you're in your 50s or 40s, you would speak Russian if you were in Uzbekistan, but the new generation is not learning Russian, they're learning English. It's very interesting. Oh, by the way, this is really crazy. This little area in China is owned by Italy. It was like some like trade agreement they had, this little area. Last story, and we'll call it a night, inshallah, open it up for Q&A. Did you know about the Turkish-Indian revival that never happened? The Pact of the Ottomans and the Nizams. Now, when we talk about Islam in India, what's the empire that tends to come to mind? The Mughals. But there were other Muslim empires. One of those empires were known as the Nizams. The Nizams are basically where Hyderabad is today. For those of you that are South Asian, if you're from India, you're often not told the history of how India occupied several states. How India occupies Kashmir, how India occupied Arunachal Pradesh, how India took over Goa. And one of the areas that they took by force was Hyderabad. Hyderabad was supposed to be its own independent nation. And the Nizams at that time, who were the rulers, were so rich that Time magazine in the 1920s did a cover on the Nizam because he was the richest person alive. He was like Elon Musk, but better looking and more moral. Right? Look at that. But there's a story of Sultan Abdul Majid, who was one of the last sultans of the Ottoman Empire. I think he was technically the last sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He realized that stuff's going down. So he had his daughters married to the sons of the Nizam. And the daughters went and they moved to what is modern-day Hyderabad. Things did not work out as planned, but they had a child. One of the sons had a child. And that child was now what? Half he was of Ottoman origin, and half he was of Nizami origin. So he has the blood of two Muslim empires running within him. Now, basically, this individual here, Sultan Abdul Majid, he decides to have a tomb built in Aurangabad. Aurangabad was part and parcel of these Muslim empires. And the reason the tomb was built in Aurangabad was because they wanted to showcase that if the Ottoman Sultan dies in India, in the Nizam, then the legitimacy of the Ottoman Caliphate is going away from Turkey, right? Because Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, he abolished the Caliphate. So they were concerned about restarting the Caliphate, so the plan was made, a secret plan, to restart the Ottoman Caliphate, where? In India. This was a plan that was discovered just 2 or 3 years ago. And in that... Is it on? Okay. I think the battery is ready. So if you can give me another mic. But basically, I'm going to just showcase a certain part of what you see here. I think this was... Sorry. Let me just fix something here. There you go. So this is a letter that was discovered 2 years before the son. His name was Mufakham Jah, right? Mufakham Jah. He passed away in 2022 or 2023. And when he passed away, the letter was discovered 2 years after his passing. What does the letter say? This is highlighted part. It's in Arabic. أن أختار صاحب الدولة والعظمى مير عثمان علي خان سلطان حيدرباد الدكن خلد الله مملكته وسلطنته لمنصب الخلافة. Basically, Sultan Abdul Majid, he did not want to give his son-in-laws the office of the caliphate because he said they're a bunch of drunks that don't do anything. And he saw something special in that grandchild instead. Or there's something he thought to himself that I will give it to my grandchild instead. The grandchild died at the age of 90-something in Istanbul. And 2 years later, this letter was found. Basically showcasing, and by the way, the British, they were constantly watching to make sure that the Ottomans no longer have a chance to rise up. But if you were to look at this picture here, I'm going to bring it up. It's very interesting. This is in Aurangabad, in India. This dilapidated tomb, which houses no one. It was made for the reason that when Sultan Abdul Majid dies, he's going to be buried there. Why wasn't he buried there? You know how I mentioned India basically invaded Hyderabad and took it? When that ended up happening, it also led to the start of violence between Hindus and Muslims, leading to the eventual creation of India and Pakistan. And during that time period, Mir Osman Ali Khan, the Nizam of Hyderabad, told Sultan Abdul Majid that I can no longer guarantee your safety were you to come here because the situation is very bad. So unfortunately, Sultan Abdul Majid died in Switzerland, and he was just buried in Istanbul, and this merely became a story to tell. And the reason that I was mentioning this, if you want to even read about it, you can read about it here. It's on the Middle East Eye. It's a whole story about why is there an abandoned Ottoman tomb in remote India. So in the end, brothers and sisters, what's the point that I'm mentioning all this? Like, why am I bringing this in? Why am I talking about Iran and Uzbekistan? What did I gain from being overseas for 3 years on my feet? I haven't even showed you every single country I went to. This is just a snippet of it. It's to showcase to you that we are much more connected than we think that we are not. People create all sorts of funky ideas of being different, when in fact we are much more similar than you would think. Just because you are in Morocco or you are in Malaysia, once upon a time, the entire world from Spain to the middle of Africa, not just North Africa, the middle of Africa used to write in Arabic. But then, as I mentioned, all these languages started changing. They would write their local vernaculars in Arabic because they saw that as the unifying factor, which was what Islam. So when it comes to modern day issues, that of Palestine, I had a chance to visit Palestine twice. It's actually very interesting. I visited Palestine the first time. You're going to find this very interesting. It does not happen right in front of us. This is really interesting. And when like October 7th everything happened, the organization sent an email saying, we are sad about the death of the Israelis and the non-Palestinians the first time right after being in Germany. This is the second time I went with my wife and a friend of mine, and we stayed at Al-Hashmi Hotel in Jerusalem, and I took this picture. This is what a world looks like in 2022 or 2023, which was not destroyed by modernity and colonization. You see the beauty of what Mecca and Medina would probably look like, that monstrosity like a you have the dome of the rock. And in today's day and age, when we see what's happening, a live stream, Black Mirror, Twilight Zone playing out in front of us, we have to start by getting to know the world around us. We have to start by getting to know people we are not familiar with. And understanding that what binds us is exactly that, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. It's not your nationalist boundaries. It's not the country you think that you're from. But rather something much greater and much more beyond that. If you want to, today, I'm for those of you who's really interested in this community, whenever I would like really prepare a khutbah back in the day from like 2018 to 20 when I was here, and like I would give a khutbah, someone was like, oh, it's too complex, I didn't understand a word, brother. Yeah, you'll go Wikipedia and everything else, but you can't just look up a word, right? But then when I would like yell at you all from the khutbah, everyone's like, yeah, best khutbah ever. I'm like, come on, man, like you have to learn. You can't just be on emotion all the time. You have to pick up a book. You have to engage with thoughts. You have to engage with narratives. And we see what's happening in Palestine. I hear it from young people as well, who are, can you imagine there's a generation of young people growing up in this country that did not know or see 9/11? They didn't feel the pangs of that. There is a group of people that don't know how ideas towards Muslims completely changed after the Soviets basically were no longer around. It's not like people don't know this. And I hear young people like, oh, why aren't the Arab countries doing anything? I said, have you heard of the 1967 war? Have you heard about how 5 of the Arab countries came together and they were completely obliterated? Something's wrong. And I don't think it's about military strength or it's just about political strength. I think it's legitimately something related to organizing. The believers at Badr were organized and they overcame 1,000 people. The believers at Uhud had many more numbers, but they couldn't overcome, the enemies there. So there's a problem deep down inside of our psyche, and that's not to say that like, oh, brother, go sit in a corner and read the Quran. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't have the answers to everything, but I can maybe help you to begin to start asking the right questions, because we're not asking the right questions, but I'll give you that. So, yeah, that's basically what I have for you. If you are interested in learning more, I just put 6 titles on the screen. If you want, you can take a picture of them. The first one I really recommend, a short book, 200 pages, called Lost Islamic. Then the last book here, The 300 Years War on Palestine, I really recommend reading that. Rashid Khalidi, whose grandfather was the former mayor of Jerusalem. He was a professor at Columbia University, and now he's retired. I really recommend those 2 books. I made mention of Shashi Tharoor. He talks about the role of the British Empire in India. This is my professor at UCLA, Professor James Gelman. It's a white guy from Jersey, but his outlook on history and colonization is phenomenal. So this is a very short history that he wrote. And the other 2 books, you can check them out about the Ottoman Empire as well as Andalus. And if you want to get in touch with me, the one thing I'm going to ask, can you just go to maktabacademy.net, scroll down, and just sign up for the email list about events and articles that I'm writing. I'm actually writing an article, Brother Anish's going to love this. It's called Islam in Hartford. Yeah. Hartford has been very dear to me since I was a kid, and I never even realized it. You know, for the 10 years that I used to have a lot of time, but can we take like 2, 3 questions?
10 minutes.
Okay, 10 a lot of time, but can we take like 2, 3 questions?
10 minutes.
Okay, 10 more minutes. So if anybody has any questions or comments, inshallah, you can ask. Oh man, a lot. Yes.
2 questions. One, don't you think we are facing the same situation as the Muslims in Spain were facing? Because you said that the surrounding kings were bribing the Muslims to rise other Muslims. Aren't we saying the same situation in this day and age? That's one question. The other question is, in your recommended books, I didn't see Edward Said's book. And I was wondering if you have a positive review of that book, or negative, or indifference.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 questions.
Yeah, so I think for today's situation, I don't think it's directly that. It depends on each situation. And I think Muslims in the United States, I think their problem is a love of wealth and a love of the issue here. There's many issues, but I think that's where it starts from, because we are American Muslims, right? From sea to shining sea, how can this happen with us, etc. So the biggest threat in 2016 was not that. The biggest threat in the Obama era was not that Obama was droning Muslims, that he was droning American citizens overseas, because of the fact that he's related to X, Y, and Z person. The biggest threat was how dare Donald Trump make me as a Muslim American feel butthurt. That's what it was. But that was the problem. Second thing is this list of books, I handpicked them knowing that they're easy to read. Edward Said is not easy to read. That's the thing. Not everyone's going to understand Conrad and the link to English literature and whatnot. If you want to read, I like Edward Said, he's phenomenal, no one can argue against that. But if you want to read Edward Said, don't read Edward Said, read the works by his students, such as the Edward Said Reader, that talks about his ideas. It's a very difficult thing to grasp, is his thought, if you don't have a background in political science and comparative literature and whatnot. So that would be my thing on Edward Said. So, yes.
So you started off, first of all, thank you so much for this. You started off with asking for a definition of colonialism and modern day colonialism, right? So modern day, 1500s to present. So one aspect, if you look at all the different regions, supremacy.
Yeah.
But that wasn't part of the definition. So I don't know, is that an evolving aspect of, because you mentioned the 3 Gs, right? God, glory, gold.
Yeah.
But the ideology, but specifically the dehumanization of all of these different regions, of looking at the people as not as humans, but as half humans,
Right.
or half devils.
Right. So this work that I'm taking from is a work from 2005. The theme of white supremacy as a neologism, like a new term that people are using, started 10 years ago. So it's conceptualized when you understand that it's European, it's going back to that for sure, but the term is a new term. So yeah, you can include it in that conversation today, but this, in my opinion, allows for a much broader understanding. Because this broader understanding is that because here's the thing, right? I praise the Ottomans and everything. Ottomans are not perfect. The Ottomans also have their fair share of problems. No empire is perfect. Don't ever be like, oh, this Muslim country, this Muslim empire is perfect. Never, ever, ever make that mistake. They have their own problems. But if any empire is doing that and say white privilege is not a part of that conversation, and I'm including white privilege just only under the definition of colonization,